See folks trickling in here. I am Lisa Senecal, and I am here, as I always am, on Thursday mornings with David Pepper. David, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Great to have you. For folks who don't know, David is the author of the Pepperspectives newsletter on Substack, essential reading. So if you are not a subscriber to Pepperspectives, please check it out. David is one of our most important voices on what's happening on state and local levels and the power that we all have to be able to push back and shore up and save our democracy. So please do make sure that you are paying attention to everything that David writes. And David, you have yesterday a really important whiteboard that you did that is on your Substack, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But your piece today, we need to really focus on. You wrote about the gerrymandering that's happening in both Ohio and now Texas. This has been going on in Ohio for a long time, but this is all bubbling up now so that people more on the national level are paying attention
Yeah.
because Trump is clearly hoping that he's going to be able to retain the House by getting these red states to gerrymander before the
Yeah.
26th election. So can you talk to us some about what has happened in Ohio and what's going on now?
Yeah. And one of the hard things about writing about states is people who are largely thinking about federal, they see state, they immediately think, well, that's not what I'm interested in. And the point of what I wrote today, just like the point of a lot of what I write about, is their control of state houses is one of the reasons why they've gained federal power. State houses allow them to suppress the vote. And in many states, depending on the processes, but most states, their hold of state level power is what lets them gerrymander. And what I'm trying to walk through today, it's long, but when I read the national media say, "Oh, they're going to do new districts in Ohio and Texas," it's totally sanitized about what actually has happened. The reason that they are eyeing taking a Ohio that has 15 districts and potentially creating 13 Republican districts and 2 Democratic districts or 12-3. The reason they can even talk about that is because for 4 years, they have violated the Ohio Constitution, just straight up violated it. And just like we're seeing in federal courts now with Trump, rulings by a bipartisan Ohio Supreme Court that said you are violating the Ohio Constitution, they simply ignore. They simply defy. So, as I try and suggest in the piece I wrote today, if we saw in another country, let's say Orban, like there were districts that were completely illegal, and a court said, "Oh, these are illegal." And if Orban just said, "Well, I don't care. I'm going to have them on the ballot anyway," and you voters of Ohio are going to be forced to vote on a set of districts that violate your own constitution, we're just going to make you do it. We would literally say, well, that's not even a democracy. That's like, what is that? That is Ohio. And so and so when the press says, oh, they're going to redistrict in Ohio and Texas, and they don't mention any of that, it literally rewards it, it sanitizes it, and it lets us continue to think that if all we do is focus on a few federal races and we don't get to the lawlessness in states like Ohio, where they get away with breaking the law, they're never held accountable. And within a year or two, it's forgotten. Like they're gonna keep doing it, and we have to like see it for what it is. And I admit it's quite sobering. Writing what I've written today is depressing. I hate writing it because I live where it's happening. But until we see that that's what they're doing, and it's a long game of lawlessness in states that they control, and they'll break the law to get what they want. And Mike Johnson and Donald Trump know it, and they celebrate it, and they bank on it. Until we see that longer term, we really won't solve it. And that's why, it's sort of painstaking, but I think it's really important that we remember all that's gotten us to a point where right now, and this is a kind of a depressing prediction, in the next few months, they will produce a map in Ohio that will clearly violate the current language in the Ohio Constitution that says they cannot unduly favor their party and they cannot unduly split districts. It's clear as a bell they can't do that. They will do it, and they will get away with it because for years that's exactly what they've done.
And let's talk about why that is a violation of the Ohio Constitution, because it wouldn't have always been. And this isn't some, like, 200 years ago in the Ohio Constitution it said this, and
Yep.
it's just kind of a holdover from a bygone era. These are changes that the people of Ohio wanted recently,
Yes.
and amended your constitution of your state
Yeah.
to make sure exactly what's happening now wouldn't happen.
Correct. In 2018, Ohio voters, and I was the chair of the party then, and I was proud of this, by 75% voted to get rid of a gerrymandered system that they had figured out was completely undemocratic. 75-25. And the language is very clear. The legislative process should not unduly favor one party. It can't be biased in favor of one party, and they should not unnecessarily split up counties and communities to get to that biased result. And the current map of Ohio, just so people know how bad it is, the current map of Ohio, the current one where Jim Jordan sits and all these others sit, it was found by the Ohio Supreme Court that it itself violated that language, but they did it anyway. They ignored the court long enough. It became the map. And yes, it's very recent history. The voters spoke clearly. And so the map today violates not just the Constitution in language that's only 6 years old and couldn't be clear, it violates the clear will of the people of Ohio. And what's bad is, I mean, as bad as that is, what's worse is some Democratic candidates, we have some great Democratic candidates here. Amelia Sykes from the Akron area, Marcy Kaptur from the Toledo area, Greg Landsman, they overperformed on a Republican gerrymandered map. And pardon my French, that pisses the Republicans off. So they are about to draw a map that's even more gerrymandered than the current illegal map to try and carve out districts that these very strong candidates maybe can't overcome. Now, I'm not giving up on these candidates. One of my calls to action is help these three candidates. They have been very good performers. They're great public servants, but Republicans aren't satisfied with a 10-5 map. And again, 10-5 is not what it should be. Ohio Democrats should have an opportunity to win at least 7 out of 15 districts. That would reflect the overall breakdown in Ohio. As recently as 2008, we had 10 of the 18 districts. Um, now we're at 10-5.
Which is
Republican,
why they got gerrymandered.
yes, which is why they made it 12-4. But for Mike Johnson to get his majority, in a tough reelection cycle where they have the White House, they need to find districts and create them in places like Texas and Ohio. And that's why I have no doubt that in some hotel room in Columbus somewhere or some law firm, they are drawing a map that takes the five that we have and trying to make them at no more than three for sure, and if they can get to 2, they will. 2 is a little harder for them to make it 13-2 for a variety of reasons. But yeah, they're trying to take a map that probably should lead to 6 or 7 districts that Democrats have a chance of winning and ratchet it down to only 3 or 2. That's 4 districts. You add that up to Texas, which is 5. That's a lot of districts in a House race next year that could come down to just a couple districts. But again, the only reason they can do it in Ohio is because it's all illegal. It's all unconstitutional. But they also changed the makeup of the court, so they have a court that basically will go along with the illegality.
Yeah, and the illegality and corruption in Ohio is so multi-layered
Yeah,
and deep that there is now a Supreme Court justice in Ohio who is related to the governor of Ohio and would have been impacted by this redistricting, who refused to recuse himself
yeah,
when this came before the court.
yeah.
And uh, but
He's the son of the governor. It's so bad. Then I go to my CLE courses as a lawyer, so this is my lawyer ethical side more than my political side. The case that the son ruled on was Adams v. DeWine. DeWine being the governor, the son's name is DeWine. He doesn't recuse. he votes for dad's illegal maps every single time he's given a chance. I mean, that's how bad it is. And this has happened in North Carolina as well, but and he tried to come up with some reason why he didn't need to recuse it. There's no good argument that a son could be ruling in his dad's favor on a case as big as the overall democracy of the state, and in this case, the federal government's makeup of the House could come down to the fact that we had this son. Now the courts, because they rigged the rules of court elections in Ohio, they made them partisan. Now he's not the swing vote anymore, but for a couple years, he was the swing. This vote of his really mattered, and it's what one reason why they were able to continue on with illegal maps is they have a son who's willing to rule in favor of his own dad's illegal maps. It's that bad. Again, if we saw this in another country, we'd be like, "My God, what's wrong with that place?" It's here in Ohio, and for some reason, because it's in Ohio, the country looks the other way more at illegality and as if it's okay than if we were looking at it in some other country where I think we would judge it incredibly negatively.
Well, and we have to acknowledge that if the Democrats were doing this in Ohio, the Republicans would be screaming bloody murder. This is not well, it's a reasonable thing to be happening regardless of party. This is
Right,
clearly, nothing says we have a mandate from the people like we have to gerrymander our congressional districts because we know that if we actually represent the will of the people, we're not going to have, they might still have a majority of congressional districts,
right.
but they wouldn't have 13-2 or, 11-4.
Yeah.
It's
And to be
so,
clear, th they lost district this is what scares them. They lost districts currently that we have that were gerrymandered for them. That's why they're addicted to gerrymandering. One thing I write about this all the time in my books. Gerrymandering is all these people have ever known. It's all Mike Johnson has ever known in his own rise. Half his elections were uncontested. He's never been in a fair race. So they're literally scared to death of a fair district. And what scares them in Ohio, of course, is that they probably thought, oh, we got away with an illegal map. We're probably going to have 12-3. And even in Republican years of 22 and 24, our candidates beat them in districts that they had drawn to favor themselves. So they're scared to death of these things. But
and
the only thing they've known, an entire generation of Republican politicians, perfectly symbolized by Mike Johnson, have only been in power in gerrymandering. So the idea that they'd ever have to go out and make their case in a 50-50 district is the scariest thing they've ever imagined. It's sort of their kryptonite. They've never had to do it. And that's why they don't think twice about it. Because again, that's kind of what they grew up with. But for those of us who think that it should be about, democracy, anyone watching here, if you're on a school board or city council, you've been through more democracy than Mike Johnson ever has been.
yeah.
He was in a state house district, and by the way, what they've done to Congress here isn't even as bad as what they did to the state house. But Mike Johnson, Louisiana, his first race for his first primary and general election for the Louisiana State House was uncontested. His reelection was uncontested. His next 3 races were gerrymandered, he didn't have a worry. His next race was uncontested, and his next race was to be Speaker of the House. Like, that's the symbol of the entire right wing. They've never really been in elections, and that's why they're so spun up on the far right, because every incentive these people face is to avoid another primary and to win a gerrymandered districts, which means they have every incentive to be extremists. That's why Mike Johnson does what he does.
And
And that's
and
why yeah,
And just in case the gerrymandering isn't effective enough, they're also the party doing everything they possibly can to disenfranchise voters and throw up roadblocks that always have a larger impact on moderate and left-leaning or Democratic voters, than on Republicans.
yeah,
It's,
yeah,
I mean, it is so incredibly blatant. If you look at the last presidential election, or you go back multiple elections, and we Ohio was a purple state. It is a red state now, but those margins are still really thin. I mean, there is reason still to watch Ohio in
Yeah,
presidential elections, if for no other reason than to see how close a race it was, so that you can have in the same year that you have, a not it's not a Mississippi margin of victory happening in Ohio,
right.
but then you look at the congressional districts and they are so incredibly out of whack, without even looking at the districts. And
Yeah,
I do encourage everybody, take a look at the congressional map of the state of Ohio. The districts, you can tell just by looking at them because they're ridiculously shaped.
yeah,
They make no sense.
yeah,
You know that this is a gerrymandered
yeah.
state.
If you
Um,
look at so I gave a few details on my Substack today. I didn't even go through it all, but there was all sorts of expert testimony. This again, just so everyone knows, the Constitution of Ohio forbids partisan gerrymandering, and the independent Supreme Court of Ohio, the last case that analyzed the current districts, found that these districts were completely illegal. And expert testimony showed that one expert did like 5,000 simulations of what would the map look like of Ohio by following the law. And it always ended up, let's say we have 15 districts, 9, 6, maybe 10, 5, but usually 9, 6. Not a single one of the 5,000 simulations that were lawful was anywhere close to the map that we have. So the court said this is clearly not even close to an attempt to follow the law. There are so many potential maps that would be compliant. Some may be a little better for Republicans, some may be a little for Democrats, but they would be compliant with the law. What you've drawn is literally, if you took all 5,000 and put them in together, your map would be way over here. It's just intentional, partisan, illegal gerrymandering. The court found that. And again, what did they do? What we see at the federal level, they simply defied the order. And the other things they do is they delay it for so long that what they did here was there was a primary in May and they just sit on their hands for long enough that at some point it's like, well, we have to have an election. The only map we have is this one that's clearly illegal. And that's what they do. And so one of my many theories, and if you see when I write and talk, I get fired up, it's because I've lived through all this stuff. When courts do not say to the lawbreakers, and here the lawmakers are the lawbreakers, we will hold you personally accountable
yeah.
for the law breaking. They don't care if they lose the case, if they're not held accountable. They're fine with it because they'll just keep breaking the law, delaying things until courts, whether it be the Ohio Supreme Court or a federal court, say, you're doing it in a way that we know that you're breaking the law. And if you keep doing it, we will immediately, before the deadline, hold you in contempt for that law breaking. Until they do that, they will keep breaking the law. And the minute the lawmakers here could see that their running out the clock strategy was working, so they would get their gerrymandered map, they had no reason in the world to not keep breaking the law. And so I do think courts and attorneys and everyone need to see that unless there is direct accountability, as in, governor, we're hauling you to court. And if you do not have a compliant map in the next 3 days, you're in contempt with all the sanctions that come with that and all the media. Until you start doing that, they will break the law as long as they need to, because in the end, gerrymandering states like Ohio is the key to most of their power, and they know it.
And
So
and
that's
in a
one of the
state
many lessons from the Ohio saga.
Yeah, and in a state where the Supreme Court makeup is what it is now in Ohio, where there is a conservative majority, very strong majority, there's not even an incentive. Like the Supreme Court in Ohio could rule in favor of a plaintiff, um, saying that these are illegally gerrymandered. And that would be because they won't enforce their rulings. It would be advantageous to rule in favor of the plaintiff saying that these are illegally gerrymandered because and then not enforce your ruling saying that
Right.
you need to redraw the districts because you can't appeal a ruling that you won. So
Yeah,
there's nowhere to go if the court isn't willing to enforce its ruling.
yeah,
It's actually a really effective, deceitful way of ending a court case that you don't want anybody to be able to appeal to a
yeah,
higher court.
yeah. I mean, in this case, so the independent court we had, and by the way, this is why another big lesson, like we saw in Wisconsin. So we had our Wisconsin moment in 2020. We flipped our court. We had an independent, bipartisan 4-3 majority that was willing to stand with this legislature, and it got destroyed by the legislature. They changed the rules of future court elections to undo it. They made the races partisan. Now we're stuck with the partisan court. But the other lesson is, and Wisconsin did it, and American sort of pro democracy coalition helped. When you have these court races, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, this is what's at stake in them. Do you have an independent court who will put up with a lawless legislature or not? Ohio, sadly, we lost ours. And as much as I was begging people to help, and people did help, we lost that window, and now we're stuck. Wisconsin is gonna claw its way out of gerrymandering long term, and Pennsylvania has, and Michigan has, so there's some good news here. They had bad gerrymanders in the last decade, but through referenda, but also courts that they won, they've clawed their way out. We're the story of what happens if you don't. You all of a sudden you have Mike Johnson and Donald Trump gleefully looking at with the districts they can gerrymander in Ohio because we didn't get our courts won. So the lesson again is accountability for lawbreakers, focus on state house races, not just the exciting celebrity style Senate races in a few states. And when you have a chance to win court seats, like Wisconsin did, everyone in this country should be all in on those races because the consequences are not just about cases in Ohio. They're as big as will Ohio send 7 Democrats to the Ohio House, sorry, to the U.S. House, or 2 Democrats. That's at stake in these court races, which until recently were very often overlooked.
Yeah, I hope this conversation, and we're talking about really awful things that have happened in the state of Ohio. But I want people to come away from these kind of conversations feeling really empowered that if we are working on the state level, these things, we do have the ability to have a huge impact on these, including those 3 members of Congress who you mentioned earlier, David, who were able to win in Republican gerrymandered districts. And
Yeah,
that is not a uniquely Ohio thing. If we run candidates everywhere, and if we support those candidates and we fight in those races and we show up for primaries and general elections and are engaged in our local and state politics, we have incredible power as citizens that we feel powerless, but most of the time it's because we cede that power by not being engaged.
yeah. And know that the other side, they've been doing this a long time. They've understood the power of state houses. They really have gone all in now on state supreme courts. You know, Alec and the Koch brothers, they're dreaming up ways to do what they did to our court, which is to make our courts more partisan, to make our courts not a check and balance on a lawless legislature, but just partisan hacks who affirm whatever they do. And what we have seen is, again, not everywhere, and unfortunately not in Ohio of late, but when you've had really good party efforts and really good candidates and a willingness, like in North Carolina, the new chair there ran in all but 2 districts. So we won that North Carolina Supreme Court seat. Allison Riggs was a great candidate either way, but having a candidate in all but 2 of those North Carolina districts helped Allison Riggs win by that tiny margin. So once we see it, which I hope, again, my mission has been to use this horrible Ohio set of circumstances to show people this is how they operate. This is their game plan. But what we've seen in the last few years, as bad as these moments feel like, in some of Wisconsin was in a terrible place 15 years ago, but they did win back their court. They are unraveling the gerrymandering. Pennsylvania did as well. When you see it and you start to fight back, the truth is you can get some wins. And in Ohio, one of the great examples is, like you said, if you had said after the map came out, the illegal map, that we would win this district around Akron, people wouldn't have thought it. I talked to Democrats, federal Democrats with weeks left, who would call me and say, can Amelia Sykes really win that? I said, yes, she can. She's a great candidate. And she won. And then she got reelected even in the Trump years. So you can overcome it as long as we're seeing the battle for what it is and not only using sort of the very narrow lens of what often becomes sort of DC driven politics. That's been the model that's allowed us, that's unfortunately having us lose versus a much more sophisticated state-based model from the right. But when we focus, we can get these wins. And there's some good news stories in states that did look like Ohio not that long ago, but have clawed their way out of it. I mean, Scott Walker and the gerrymander. I mean, Wisconsin clawed back. Pennsylvania did the same. Michigan had a terrible gerrymander all the last decade. They overcame it. They now have a Supreme Court that's helping to enforce it. So there is a path out.
There is, and the other thing that we were going to talk about, David, today is so important, and we're running out of time because I really wanted to make sure that we went deep on this gerrymandering conversation today. But I hope everybody will look at David's Substack from yesterday, where you talk about what's happening with ICE and I'm going to call it a concentration camp in Florida. I know not everybody's ready to do that, but I don't know how you look at the conditions there and how people are being sent for completely unjustified reasons, how we call it anything but that. But David, can you just quickly talk about
Yeah.
the dehumanization process and we we've gotten to where we are and where we've seen historically that leads?
Yeah, I mean, what scares me is we've seen the individual stories when we're calling something alligator Alcatraz, and we've seen, the line that everyone's a criminal. You see the faceless anonymous sweeps that not don't just turn the targets of these sweeps into being anonymous, which is dangerous, but the perpetrators are also now anonymous. I go through 8 features of the current mass deportation process, and each one is terrible. But what you are seeing is a combination that clearly, if you look in history, is a recipe for mass atrocity. I don't like saying those words. I'm not an alarmist, but you cannot look dehumanization, incentives to scale it up, massive money now injected thanks to this terrible budget bill to scale it up to a huge bureaucracy. Again, getting rid of any measures of accountability about how you're supposed to conduct sweeps, targeting people because of how they look or how they speak, and not because you have any reasonable suspicion. Sending no information about who's in what camp, were they moved, they can't talk to their family or their lawyer. You add all this stuff up and it's just very clear what this leads to. It's very clear. And so I did all that again, not to, I mean, I'm sorry that everything's so dark on our conversation today. There's reasons for hope too. Americans are seeing this and they don't like it. I mean, the current polling is what is going on? We don't like this. That's good. And that could be just in time because the factors that are coming together are the kind that in 2 or 3 years you could look back and say, this is why this horrible thing happened, because everything was set up in a way, it's all faceless, it's all anonymous. There are incentives to be inhumane, and there are no incentives to be humane. And it's big and it's sort of bureaucratic and it's the wheels of government. And adding all that up should scare the hell out of all of us. And to have a Supreme Court that doesn't seem to care
Yeah.
and is letting the delays and just like that Ohio example, letting delays happen, letting lawlessness happen. It is a recipe. As I said, it's a recipe for mass atrocity. I don't say that lightly, but it's just you can't look at it and all those features and not conclude that. So my hope is that the good news is the American people are going south on it. Trump is now underwater in immigration. There's some newfound appreciation for immigrants we're seeing, led by Republican voters, honestly. They've been the ones going
Mhm.
south quicker. Joe Rogan's talking about it. So the hope is that public sentiment and maybe some heroic judges, like the one in LA who stopped the ICE raids temporarily at least, that starts to save the day. Because if the day is not saved, I have a really bad feeling that you and I in a year or two will say this is what we worried about when we talked about this in July of 2025. It's that
Yeah.
bad. That's
I mean,
scary.
the power of American citizens to be showing up right now, going out in the streets and protesting this, driving their elected representatives batshit with the amount of calls and emails and letters and people standing at those offices complaining about what's happening. We can either have the conversation in a couple of years saying, "My God, we saw this coming, and we all just didn't do enough to stop it," or we can be saying, "Look how close we came, and look what the American people did
Yeah,
when they saw that this is what our country had in mind and was heading toward, and what an incredible example we are for other countries where this might happen because we were able to stop it." So I hope everyone, this is not a time for despair because we still have incredible power as the American people. There are rallies around the country tonight.
yeah,
Um, Go to indivisible.com and check out .com.org. I'm sorry, I'm spacing on that. It's one or the other. Check it out, please. You can find out where rallies are happening. And you don't have to wait for one to be happening.
yeah,
There are plenty of things that we can be doing on a daily basis in our communities, in front of congressional offices, writing and putting pressure. Um, do it
right,
all the time because these people have to know that they are going to be held accountable for what is being done in America's name right
right,
now in places like this concentration camp
yeah.
in Florida.
The way I like to think about it is you can kinda tell throughout even the Ohio conversation or the deportation conversation, we are always seeming to be the ones surprised by what they do. "Oh my god, they did this, they did that." It's always catches us off guard because 'cause we're surprised. And so my attitude with these protests is, let us be the ones surprising them. Let
Yeah,
us catch them off guard. And how do we catch them off guard? Because we show up in bigger crowds that shock them. My God, I've never seen this many people in my red district mad at me, protesting that this or
yeah,
that, gerrymandering. Let us be the ones who are shocking them. Or I've never had an opponent before because my district's so gerrymandered, and that opponent is kicking my ass everywhere. That opponent is knocking on doors, explaining that I stripped away Medicaid from tens of thousands of people. That opponent's in a parade passing out flyers about my record. Let's and if you do this stuff, they will think I want them to be the ones that are thinking, "My God, I've never seen this before." That's the way we come back. Let's us shock them through our activism, through our energy, through our aggressiveness, and that's how I think we start clawing back the other way. So I'm tired of us being the ones surprised by what they do, and I want to be the ones that through our effort stuns them by how effective, how sharp, how aggressive we are for once. And I think that's got to be the mindset that drives us to keep going. That's why I certainly keep going.
yep. I'm right there with you, David. What a perfect way to end. Thank you so much, as always, for being here and talking with us about all of this. And thanks everybody for joining today. Please share this conversation and David's Pepper Perspectives Substack. I really encourage people to support the Substacks with paid subscriptions that you're getting value out of because having these conversations, doing the work that we're doing and that David is doing, this is how you get the information out to people and encourage them to surprise
Yeah.
the Republicans who are doing this stuff. We have to have an educated populace, and we're going to do it because everybody is getting engaged and supporting the people who are trying to inform America and get them engaged and active. So support the publications that you can, that you find valuable, and share the work that you think is important. And come back again, continue to watch these conversations. I'll be back here next Thursday with David. We're going to move to 9 a.m. instead of 10, and hope to see you all again then. And looking forward to seeing you, David, always.
Thanks. Good to see you. Take care, everybody. Keep
Bye bye.
going.